Laura Bennett sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she folded another shirt and placed it carefully into the small suitcase. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside the window. She moved quietly, trying not to wake Kevin, who lay sprawled across the other side of the bed, snoring loudly. Every creak of the floorboard made her heart race, but she forced herself to keep going. This was her chance, her one shot at freedom, and she couldn't afford to hesitate now. For years, Laura had convinced herself that things would get better. When they first met, Kevin had seemed like the perfect man, charming, confident, and full of promises. But over time, his charm turned sour, revealing a controlling and often cruel side that left Laura feeling trapped. At first, it was small things, comments about what she wore or how she styled her hair. Then came the arguments, which grew louder and more frequent. Eventually, those arguments escalated into something worse, leaving her bruised both physically and emotionally. Still, she stayed, telling herself that leaving would be too hard, too messy. Until tonight. Tonight had been different. Tonight, Kevin had crossed a line he'd never crossed before. His words weren't just angry. They were venomous, cutting, deeper than any insult ever had. For the first time, Laura saw clearly what her life had become, a prison with walls built by fear and guilt. And so, as Kevin slept off the effects of too much whiskey, she decided it was time to break free. The suitcase was almost full now, packed with essentials, clothes, toiletries, a few cherished photographs. On top of everything, she placed an envelope containing a little cash and the contact information for Emily, her old college roommate. Emily lived in Seattle, hundreds of miles away from this suffocating existence. Laura didn't have a plan beyond getting there, but she knew she couldn't stay here a moment longer. She glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 2:47 a.m. If she hurried, she could catch the earliest flight out of town. With one last look at Kevin's sleeping form, she zipped up the suitcase, grabbed her purse, and slipped out of the bedroom. The house was eerily silent, every sound magnified, the click of the front door lock, the squeak of the hinges as she opened it, the crunch of gravel beneath her shoes as she hurried to her car. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the keys, and tears blurred her vision as she backed out of the driveway. But once she hit the open road, a strange sense of calm washed over her. For the first time in years, she felt alive. By the time Laura reached the airport, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. She parked in the long-term lot, dragging her suitcase behind her as she made her way to the terminal. Inside, the building buzzed with early morning activity, travelers rushing to check-in counters, families waiting in line at security checkpoints, announcements echoing over the intercom. Laura joined the crowd, clutching her boarding pass tightly, in one hand while keeping a wary eye on her surroundings. Despite her resolve, she couldn't shake the feeling that Kevin might somehow appear, pulling her back into the nightmare she'd worked so hard to escape. After clearing security, Laura found her gate and settled into a chair near the window. She watched planes taxi down the runway, their engines roaring as they lifted off into the sky. Each takeoff filled her with hope, reminding her that she was about to leave her old life behind. Yet, amid the excitement, exhaustion began to creep in. The adrenaline that had fueled her escape was fading, leaving her drained and jittery. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, closing her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them again, the scene around her had changed. The gate area was nearly empty save for a few stragglers. Confused, Laura checked the time on her phone. It was later than she thought. Panicking, she stood up and scanned the monitors overhead, searching for her flight. That's when she noticed it. A plane idling at a nearby gate, its door still open. Without thinking, she grabbed her suitcase and hurried toward it, assuming it was her flight to Seattle. As she stepped onto the aircraft, she immediately realized her mistake. This wasn't a commercial airliner filled with rows of seats and passengers chatting noisily. Instead, it was a sleek private jet, its interior luxurious and intimate. There were only a handful of chairs, arranged around a central table, and, Most of them were already occupied by people dressed in suits. Laura froze, unsure whether to turn back or apologize for intruding. Before she could decide, a voice spoke up from behind her. "Looks like we've got ourselves a stowaway." Startled, Laura turned to see a man standing near the cockpit entrance. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sharp features softened by a hint of amusement in his expression. His piercing blue eyes studied her curiously, taking in her disheveled appearance and the suitcase clutched awkwardly in her hand. I'm sorry," Laura stammered, backing toward the exit. "I must have boarded the wrong plane." "It happens," the man said smoothly, stepping forward to block her path. "Why don't you take a seat? We'll figure this out once we're airborne." Before Laura could protest, the door closed behind her, sealing her inside. Panic bubbled up in her chest as the plane began to move, rolling steadily toward the runway. She sank into the nearest chair, gripping the armrests tightly as the engines roared to life. Beside her, the man who had spoken earlier settled into his own seat, watching her with that same curious gaze. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. Laura shook her head, though she wasn't sure if it was in response to his question or the absurdity of the situation. "No, I'm not okay. I'm on the wrong plane heading God knows where, and I don't even know who you are." The man chuckled softly, extending a hand. "Nathan Cole. And don't worry. You're not the first person to make a mistake like this, though admittedly you're probably the most interesting." Despite herself, Laura managed a weak smile. "Laura Bennett," she murmured, shaking his hand. "And trust me, my life is anything but interesting." Nathan raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "We'll see about that." As the plane climbed higher into the sky, Laura tried to focus on the view outside the window, hoping it would distract her from the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore the presence of the man beside her, or the nagging suspicion that this journey was going to change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin, a steady rhythm that seemed to mock Laura's racing thoughts. She stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by like cotton candy stretched across the sky. But no matter how peaceful the view seemed, she couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her insides. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be on a commercial flight to Seattle, heading toward safety and a fresh start. Instead, she was trapped on a private jet with strangers, and one very mysterious man named Nathan Cole. Nathan sat beside her, calm and collected as if boarding the wrong plane was an everyday occurrence. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, his piercing blue eyes occasionally flicking to her face. Laura could feel his gaze even when she wasn't looking at him, and it made her uncomfortable. Was he judging her? Trying to figure her out? Or was he simply bored? "You're awfully quiet," Nathan said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was smooth, but carried a hint of curiosity, like he was trying to coax her into revealing something. Laura glanced at him, then quickly looked away. "What do you want me to say? I'm on the wrong plane. I don't know where we're going or why I'm here or who any of these people are." She gestured vaguely toward the other passengers, who were either typing on laptops or talking quietly among themselves. None of them seemed bothered by her presence, or if they were, they weren't showing it. Nathan smirked, leaning forward slightly. "Fair enough. Let's start with the basics. Who are you, Laura Bennett?" She frowned, unsure how to answer. How much should she tell him? For all she knew, he could be part of whatever strange situation she'd stumbled into. Still, something about his tone, calm, almost reassuring, made her want to trust him. "I'm just someone trying to get away," she said after a moment. "From a bad situation." Nathan nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she'd said. "And this bad situation, does it have a name?" Laura hesitated, then sighed. "His name is Kevin, my husband." "Ah." Nathan's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Sympathy, maybe, or recognition. "Let me guess. Things got worse before you decided to leave." She swallowed hard, memories flooding back. The arguments, the insults, the night spent crying herself to sleep. Yeah, a lot worse. Well, you're not alone, Nathan said softly. Plenty of people find themselves running from situations they never thought they'd end up in. The important thing is that you took the first step. That's courage, Laura. Blinked, surprised by his words. No one had ever called her courageous before, not even herself. She'd always thought of escape as survival, not bravery. But hearing Nathan say it made her feel stronger somehow. Like maybe she wasn't as weak as Kevin had always claimed. Before she could respond, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be arriving at our destination shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. Laura stiffened, her heart sinking. Our destination? Where exactly is that? Nathan glanced at her, his lips curving into a faint smile. You really don't know, do you? No. That's what I've been saying. Laura's voice rose slightly, drawing a few glances from the other passengers. She lowered it again, leaning closer to Nathan. Where are we going? And why won't anyone tell me? He hesitated as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he shrugged. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure myself. All I know is that this isn't a typical flight. These planes usually head to special locations, places most people don't know about. What kind of places? Laura demanded, her anxiety spiking. Secret government facilities? Alien research labs? What? Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. Nothing quite so dramatic. Think of it more like a retreat, somewhere off the grid where certain projects can operate without interference. Projects? Laura repeated, her mind racing. What kind of projects? That's classified, Nathan said simply, though his tone suggested he might know more than he was letting on. But don't worry, they're not dangerous. At least not to you. Laura wanted to believe him, but skepticism crept in. Classified projects? Off the grid? It sounded like something out of a conspiracy theory, not real life. And yet here, she was sitting on a private jet with a stranger who spoke in riddles. If this wasn't dangerous, why did it feel so wrong? As the plane began its descent, Laura pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, searching for any sign of their destination. Below, the landscape stretched endlessly, a barren desert dotted with jagged mountains and patches of dry scrubland. There were no signs of civilization, no roads or buildings, just miles of emptiness. Her stomach churned. Whatever this place was, it was far removed from the world she knew. When the plane touched down, the door opened with a hiss, and a rush of hot, dry air flooded the cabin. Laura followed Nathan off the plane, shielding her eyes from the blinding sunlight. Ahead of them stood a sleek black SUV, flanked by two men in dark uniforms. One of them stepped forward, nodding curtly at Nathan before turning his attention to Laura. You must be Ms. Bennett, he said, his voice clipped and professional. Please follow me. Laura hesitated, glancing at Nathan for reassurance. He gave her a small nod, mouthing the words, It's okay. Reluctantly, she followed the man to the vehicle, sliding into the back seat while Nathan climbed in beside her. The drive was silent, save for the rumble of the tires on the dirt road. Laura stared out the window, her mind spinning with questions she didn't dare ask. What had she gotten herself into? And why did everyone act like her presence here was expected? After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a massive compound nestled between two towering cliffs. High walls surrounded the facility, topped with barbed wire and surveillance cameras. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their faces stern and unyielding. As the SUV passed through the gates, Laura caught sight of people moving about inside. Scientists, in lab coats, engineers huddled around computers, workers carrying equipment. It looked like a hive of activity, but there was an undercurrent of secrecy that sent a shiver down her spine. This is it, Nathan said quietly, breaking the silence. Welcome to Horizon. Horizon? Laura echoed, frowning. What, is this place? Nathan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. It's a research facility, cutting-edge stuff. Some of the brightest minds in the world work here. On what? Laura pressed, her voice rising slightly. You keep saying classified and special, but none of this makes sense. Why am I here? Did someone bring me here on purpose? Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yes, he admitted. Someone arranged for you to board that plane. Someone who knows you're unique. Unique? Laura repeated, baffled. What does that even mean? Before Nathan could answer, the car came to a stop in front of the main building. The driver opened the door, gesturing for them to exit. Laura stepped out reluctantly, her legs feeling like jelly beneath her. As they approached the entrance, she turned to Nathan, her voice trembling. I don't understand any of this. Am I in danger? Nathan met her gaze, his expression serious. Not from us, he said firmly. But there are things you need to see, and decisions you'll have to make. Just trust me, okay? Laura wanted to argue, to demand answers, but exhaustion and fear left her too drained to fight. Instead, she nodded silently, allowing Nathan to guide her inside. Whatever awaited her in this strange place, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. The inside of the compound was nothing like Laura had imagined. Instead of cold, sterile hallways, the building was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and modern furniture scattered throughout. Large windows lined the walls, letting in natural light despite the harsh desert outside. It looked more like a high-end office than a secret research facility. But beneath the polished surface there was an undeniable tension, a sense that something important, maybe even dangerous, was happening here. Nathan led Laura through the main lobby, past groups of people chatting quietly or typing furiously on laptops. Some glanced up as they passed, their eyes lingering on Laura for a moment before returning to their work. She felt out of place, like she didn't belong in this world of precision and purpose. Her frayed nerves were starting to fray even more. Where are we going? Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question had been burning in her mind since they entered the building, but she hadn't dared to ask until now. To meet someone, Nathan replied without looking back. His tone was calm, almost casual, but Laura noticed the way his jaw tightened slightly as if he were bracing himself for what lay ahead. They'll explain everything. Explain what? Laura pressed, frustration bubbling up inside her. You keep saying I'm unique, that someone arranged for me to be here, but you won't tell me why. What's so special about me? Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her. For the first time, his usual composure faltered. There was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, like he was debating how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed. It's complicated, he said, but it has to do with your brain, specifically the way it processes information. You have certain patterns that make you valuable to the project here. My brain? Laura repeated, stunned. What does my brain have to do with anything? I'm not some kind of genius or scientist. It's not about intelligence, Nathan explained patiently. It's about potential. Your neural activity is unusual. It shows signs of adaptability and resilience that most people don't have. That's rare, and it makes you a candidate for something big. Laura stared at him, her thoughts spinning. Candidate for what? Adaptability and resilience sounded like vague buzzwords, not explanations. Before she could press further, Nathan gestured for her to follow him again. They walked down a long corridor lined with doors, each one marked with numbers and symbols Laura didn't recognize. At the end of the hall, they stopped in front of a heavy metal door. Nathan swiped a card through a scanner, and the door clicked. Open inside was a large room filled with monitors, computers, and equipment Laura couldn't begin to understand. In the center of the room stood a man in his late 50s, dressed in a crisp suit that seemed out of place among all the tech. He had sharp features and piercing gray eyes that locked onto Laura the moment she stepped inside. Beside him was a younger woman holding a tablet, her expression unreadable. Ms. Bennett, the man said, his voice smooth but commanding. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Marcus Hale, Director of Project Horizon. Laura swallowed hard, her throat dry. I don't understand. Why am I here? Dr. Hale smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Let's start with the basics. Project Horizon is an initiative designed to explore new frontiers of human consciousness. We've developed technology capable of accessing alternate dimensions, realities parallel to our own. It's groundbreaking work, but it comes with challenges. One of those challenges is finding individuals who can interface with the system safely. Alternate dimensions? Laura echoed, her voice trembling. This was getting stranger by the second. You mean other worlds? In a manner of speaking, Dr. Hale confirmed. These dimensions exist alongside ours, separated by barriers we're only beginning to understand. Our goal is to bridge those barriers and learn from them. However, the process requires a stable anchor, a person whose mind can adapt to the shifts without collapsing under the strain. And you think I'm that person? Laura asked, incredulous. Why me? I'm nobody. On the contrary, Dr. Hale said, his smile widening slightly. Your recent medical scans caught our attention. They revealed unique neural patterns that suggest a high tolerance for stress and change, qualities essential for interfacing with the system. Someone flagged your profile months ago, marking you as a potential candidate. When the opportunity arose to bring you here, we took it. Laura's head spun. Medical scans? Who had flagged her profile? And why hadn't anyone told her about any of this? She glanced at Nathan, searching for answers, but his expression remained neutral. Whatever role he played in all of this, he wasn't giving anything away. This is insane, Laura muttered, wrapping her arms around herself. You kidnapped me off a plane because of some weird brain scan? Do you know how crazy that sounds? We prefer to think of it as redirection, Dr. Hale corrected smoothly. You were already leaving your previous life behind. We simply provided a new path for you to follow. A new path? Laura snapped, anger rising in her chest. You don't get to decide my path. I didn't agree to any of this. You're right, Nathan interjected suddenly, stepping forward. His voice was firm but gentle, cutting through the tension. She didn't agree to this, and we need to respect that. Dr. Hale, maybe we should give her time to process everything before we push her into anything. Dr. Hale raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. After a moment, he nodded curtly. Very well. Ms. Bennett, take the rest of the day to settle in. We'll discuss your role in the project tomorrow. Until then, Mr. Cole, we'll show you to your quarters. With that, Dr. Hale turned and left the room, followed by the woman with the tablet. Laura watched them go, her heart pounding. As soon as they were gone, she turned to Nathan, her frustration boiling over. What is wrong with these people? She demanded. They act like this is normal, like dragging random people into their experiments is just another Tuesday. They're scientists, Nathan said quietly. To them, this is normal. They see the bigger picture, the potential benefits of the project, but sometimes they forget about the human element. Well, I'm not forgetting, Laura shot back. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask to be part of some crazy experiment. All I wanted was to escape Kevin and start over. Is that too much to ask? Nathan studied her for a long moment, his expression softening. No, it's not too much to ask, and I promise. No one's going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. But listen, if you stay, if you give this a chance, you might find something worth fighting for. Something bigger than yourself. Laura opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. There was sincerity in Nathan's voice, a quiet conviction that made her pause. Could there really be something good hidden within all this madness? Before she could respond, Nathan gestured toward the door. Come on, let's get you somewhere you can rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure things out. Reluctantly, Laura followed him out of the room. As they walked, Nathan pointed out various parts of the compound, the cafeteria, the recreation area, the sleeping quarters. It was all clean and functional, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Still, Laura couldn't help but notice the beauty in the details. The vibrant artwork on the walls, the lush plants dotting the corners, the soft hum of conversation filling the air. Despite everything, there was a sense of community here, a shared purpose that drew people together. When they reached her assigned quarters, Nathan handed her a key card. "This is yours for now," he said. "If you need anything, let me know. I'll check in on you later." "Thanks," Laura murmured, slipping the card into her pocket. She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I appreciate you sticking up for me back there." Nathan smiled faintly. "Just doing my job. Try to get some sleep, okay? You've had a long day." After he left, Laura closed the door behind her and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. The room was small but comfortable, with a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the desert. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but her mind refused to shut off. Alternate dimensions, neural patterns, a project that could change the world or destroy it. How had she ended up here? And more importantly, what was she supposed to do next? As she lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling in her mind. Freedom. She'd come here seeking escape, hoping to leave her old life behind. But now, trapped in this strange new world, she wondered if true freedom was still possible, or if she'd simply traded one prison for another. The next morning, Laura woke up to the sound of birds chirping faintly outside her window. For a moment, she lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that everything that had happened was just a bad dream. But as she sat up and saw the unfamiliar room, the plain walls, the neatly made bed, the keycard sitting on the desk, reality came crashing back. She wasn't home. She wasn't safe. She was in a secret facility in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by people who thought her brain was special enough to unlock alternate dimensions. She sighed deeply and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her head felt heavy, weighed down by confusion and fear. What was she supposed to do now? Run? Stay? Trust these people? Or Nathan, and hope for the best? The questions swirled in her mind like a storm, but no answers came. All she could do was take it one step at a time. After getting dressed, Laura stepped out into the hallway. It was quiet, with only a few people passing by, their faces focused and determined. She wandered aimlessly for a while, unsure where to go or what to do. Eventually, she found her way to the cafeteria, drawn by the smell of fresh coffee and toast. Inside, groups of people sat at tables, chatting casually or eating in silence. No one paid much attention to her as she grabbed a tray and filled it with food. Just as she was about to sit alone at an empty table, Nathan appeared, holding his own tray. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing toward the seat across from her. Laura hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the clinking of utensils and low murmur of conversation filling the air. Finally, Laura spoke up. "So, what happens today? Am I supposed to meet with Dr. Hale again?" Nathan nodded, setting down his fork. "Yeah, later this morning. He'll explain more about the project and how you fit into it. But don't worry, I'll be there with you." "That's comforting," Laura said dryly, though there was a hint of gratitude in her tone. Despite everything, Nathan's presence gave her a small sense of stability in this chaotic situation. "Listen," Nathan continued, leaning forward slightly. "I know this is overwhelming, and I won't lie. It's not going to get easier anytime soon, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever decision you make, I'll support you." Laura looked at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was honesty, and maybe a touch of vulnerability. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked softly. "You barely know me." Nathan smiled faintly. "Maybe because I see a bit of myself in you. Someone who didn't choose this life but ended up here anyway. Besides, you've been through enough already. You deserve a break." His words lingered in her mind long after they finished eating. When they left the cafeteria together, Laura felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. Later that morning, Laura found herself back in the same room where she'd met Dr. Hale the day before. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Instead of standing in the center of the room, Dr. Hale sat at a conference table, flanked by several other scientists. A large screen displayed complex diagrams and equations that meant nothing to Laura. Nathan stood near the door, giving her an encouraging nod when she entered. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett," Dr. Hale greeted her, motioning for her to take a seat. "I trust you slept well?" "As well as can be expected," Laura replied, settling into a chair. Her hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them together to steady them. Dr. Hale nodded, unfazed. "Excellent. Let's dive right in, shall we?" As I mentioned yesterday, Project Horizon focuses on accessing alternate dimensions. These dimensions exist parallel to our own, each with its own set of rules, landscapes, and even civilizations. Our goal is to learn from them, to harness their knowledge and resources to improve our world. He paused, gesturing toward the screen behind him. However, crossing into these dimensions isn't as simple as opening a door. The process requires advanced technology and a human anchor. That's where you come in. Laura frowned, her stomach twisting with unease. "What exactly does being an anchor involve?" "It means serving as the bridge between our reality and the others," Dr. Hale explained. "Your neural patterns allow you to adapt to the shifts in consciousness required to navigate these dimensions safely. Without someone like you, the system becomes unstable, risking catastrophic failure." "So, I'd basically be a guinea pig?" Laura asked, her voice rising slightly. "You'd send me into some unknown place just to see what happens?" "It's not quite like that," one of the other scientists interjected, a woman with short brown hair and glasses. "We've done extensive testing to ensure the process is as safe as possible. You wouldn't be going in blind. We'd monitor your vitals every step of the way." "Safe?" Laura repeated, incredulous. "How? Can you guarantee anything about something you barely understand?" "We can't," Dr. Hale admitted bluntly. "But progress always comes with risks. Would you rather live in a world that never moves forward because we're too afraid to try?" Laura opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. Deep down, she knew he had a point. Humanity had always pushed boundaries, taken chances, explored the unknown. But did that mean she had to be the one to take the leap? Wasn't there someone else better suited for this? Before she could respond, Nathan stepped forward. "Dr. Hale, perhaps we should give Laura some time to think about this. It's a lot to process." Dr. Hale studied Laura for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Take the rest of the day to consider your options. If you decide to participate, we'll begin preparations immediately. Otherwise, he trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. As the meeting ended, Laura followed Nathan out of the room, her thoughts racing. "What happens if I say no?" she asked once they were alone. "You walk away," Nathan said simply. "No strings attached. They may not like it, but they can't force you to stay." "And if I say yes?" "Then you become part of the team. You'll undergo training, work closely with the scientists, and eventually interface with the system. It's not an easy path, but it could be rewarding, if you're willing to take the risk." Laura stopped walking and turned to face him. "Why are you really doing this, Nathan? Why are you here?" For the first time, Nathan's usual calm demeanor faltered. He hesitated, then sighed. "Because I believe in the project. Not just the science, but the potential it has to change lives, for the better. I've seen what happens when humanity refuses to grow, to evolve. I don't want to be part of that stagnation." His words struck a chord deep within Laura. She understood the desire to make a difference, to leave the world better than she found it. But was she ready to sacrifice her own safety for such a lofty goal? That evening, Laura sat alone in her quarters, staring out the window at the endless desert. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, peaceful, even serene. Yet inside, she felt anything but calm. Her mind replayed the events of the past 2 days, boarding the wrong plane, meeting Nathan, learning about Project Horizon. Each memory brought new questions, new doubts. Could she really trust these people? Was she strong enough to handle whatever lay ahead? Finally, she made her decision. Whatever happened next, she would face it head on. She wasn't the same person who had fled her toxic marriage, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. She was stronger now, or at least she wanted to be. With a deep breath, Laura stood up and grabbed the keycard from her desk. It was time to find Nathan and tell him her choice. The tension between Laura and Nathan was thick as they walked through the dimly lit corridors of the compound. After discovering the truth about Project Horizon, that it wasn't just about exploring alternate dimensions but controlling them, Laura felt a mix of anger, fear, and betrayal. Nathan had known all along what was really going on, yet he hadn't told her. He'd let her believe the project was harmless, even noble. Now, as they moved silently toward an exit, she couldn't decide whether to trust him or turn and run in the opposite direction. "Laura," Nathan said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was low, urgent. "I know you're upset with me and you have every right to be, but I need you to focus. We don't have much time." She shot him a sharp look, her jaw clenched. "Focus on what? You lied to me, Nathan. You knew. This whole thing was about domination, not exploration. Did you think I wouldn't care?" "I didn't lie," he said, his tone defensive but tinged with guilt. "I omitted things, yes, but only because I thought it would keep you safe. If you'd known the full scope of the project from the start, you might have panicked and done something reckless." "And what makes you think I won't do something reckless now?" Laura snapped, her voice rising despite herself. She stopped, walking, forcing him to turn and face her. "You've been lying to me since the moment we met. How do I know anything you say is true?" Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. For once, his usual calm demeanor cracked, revealing the stress beneath. "Because I'm risking everything to help you get out of here. Does that count? For anything?" Laura stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. His eyes were steady, unwavering. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Fine. But if you're lying to me again, so help me." "I'm not," Nathan said firmly. "Now come on, we need to move." They continued down the corridor, sticking close to the shadows. The compound was eerily quiet, most of its occupants either asleep or occupied elsewhere. Still, Laura's heart raced with every step, half expecting alarms to blare or guards to appear around the corner. Her mind kept replaying the events that had led them to this point: the discovery of the classified files, the confrontation with Dr. Hale, and the realization that Kevin had somehow tracked her down. Kevin. Just the thought of him made her stomach churn. Somehow he'd learned about her location and struck a deal with the project leaders to bring her back. Whether it was money, influence, or sheer manipulation, Laura didn't know, and she didn't want to find out. All she knew was that returning to him wasn't an option, not after everything she'd endured to escape. As they approached a side, "Doctor marked emergency exit." Nathan paused, glancing over his shoulder. "This leads outside," he whispered. "From there, we'll head into the desert. There's a safe house about 10 miles north. It's remote, but it should give us enough cover until we figure out our next move." Laura frowned. 10 miles? On foot? In the middle of nowhere? "It's the best chance we've got," Nathan replied grimly. "If we stay here, they'll catch us. And if Kevin gets his hands on you..." He trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Laura nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't like the idea of trekking through the desert in the dead of night, but staying behind seemed far worse. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped outside. The desert air hit her like a wall, cold and dry, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush. Above, the sky stretched endlessly, speckled with stars so bright they almost hurt to look at. For a moment, Laura forgot her fear, awestruck by the vastness of it all. Then reality came crashing back and she hurried after Nathan, who was already moving across the rocky terrain. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, their footsteps crunching softly against the sand and gravel. Every sound, the distant howl of the wind, the rustle of bushes, made Laura jump, convinced they were being followed. Her legs ached and her throat burned with thirst, but she forced herself to keep going. Stopping wasn't an option. After what seemed like forever, Nathan slowed down and pointed ahead. "There," he said, his voice barely audible. "See that rock formation? The safe house is just beyond it." Laura squinted, spotting the jagged outline of rocks against the horizon. Relief washed over her, though it was short-lived. As they drew closer, the faint hum of engines reached her ears. She froze, grabbing Nathan's arm. "Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment, then cursed under his breath. "Vehicles. They're coming." Panic surged through Laura as headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness, like knives. Without hesitation, Nathan grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the rocks. "We need to hide now." They scrambled up the slope, finding shelter behind a cluster of boulders. Crouching low, they watched as 2 trucks roared past, kicking up clouds of dust. Armed men leaned out of the windows, scanning the area with flashlights. Laura pressed herself against the rock, her breath shallow, praying they wouldn't be spotted. When the vehicles disappeared into the distance, Nathan exhaled sharply. "That was too close, let's keep moving." But as they stood to leave, a voice rang out behind them. "Going somewhere?" Laura's blood ran cold. Slowly, she turned to see 3 men emerging from the shadows, weapons drawn. One of them stepped forward, smirking. It was Kevin. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look who decided to play runaway bride. Did you really think you could escape me, Laura?" She took a step back, her body trembling with rage and fear. "Stay away from me, Kevin. You have no right to be here." "Oh, sweetheart," Kevin sneered, closing the gap between them. "I have every right. You're my wife, remember? Or did you forget that little detail when you ran off?" Before she could respond, Nathan stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't your fight." Kevin laughed, shaking his head. "Oh, but it is. You see, I made a deal with your bosses here. They promised to bring her back to me, and I promised to make their lives easier in return. Win-win, right?" Nathan's expression darkened. "You're a coward, Kevin. Using others to do your dirty work. Pathetic." Kevin's smirk faded, replaced by a scowl. "Watch your mouth, pal. Unless you want to end up buried in the desert." Tension crackled in the air as the 2 men faced off, neither willing to back down. Laura glanced around, searching for a way out. They were outnumbered and unarmed, with no clear escape route. Desperation clawed at her chest, but then she remembered something Nathan had said earlier. Focus. If she wanted to survive, she needed to stay calm and think. Her gaze landed on a loose rock nearby. Quietly, she bent down and picked it up, weighing it in her hand. When one of Kevin's men shifted slightly, creating an opening, she acted without thinking. With all her strength, she hurled the rock at the nearest flashlight, shattering the bulb and plunging the area into partial darkness. "Run!" Nathan shouted, grabbing her hand. They bolted, weaving through the rocks as shouts erupted behind them. Bullets whizzed past, striking the ground with sharp cracks. Laura's lungs burned, her legs screaming in protest, but she didn't stop. Ahead, she saw a narrow crevice in the rock wall, a possible hiding spot. Pulling Nathan along, she ducked inside, pressing herself against the cool stone. For several agonizing minutes, they listened as their pursuers searched the area, their voices growing louder and then fading away. Finally, the sounds receded entirely, leaving only the eerie silence of the desert. Nathan let out a shaky breath, turning to Laura. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "Yeah, thanks to you." He shook his head. "No thanks to you, that was quick thinking back there." A small smile tugged at her lips, though it quickly faded. "What do we do now?" "We keep going," Nathan said, his voice resolute. "The safe house is still close. Once we reach it, we can regroup and figure out our next move. Together." Laura hesitated, then nodded. Despite everything, she trusted him. Or at least, she wanted to. Together they emerged from the crevice and continued their journey, the weight of uncertainty heavy on their shoulders. But amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. Laura wasn't running anymore. She was fighting. For her freedom, for her future, and for the chance to live a life on her own terms. The safe house was exactly as Nathan had described. Small, secluded, and barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Nestled in the shadow of a rocky outcrop, the structure blended seamlessly with the desert landscape, its weathered walls painted the same dusty brown as the surrounding terrain. Inside, it was sparse but functional. A cot in one corner, a table stacked with canned food and bottled water, and a single window covered by thick curtains to block out light. It wasn't luxurious, but after hours of running through the desert, Laura felt an overwhelming sense of relief just stepping inside. Nathan locked the door behind them, then turned to face her. His face was streaked with dirt, his shirt torn at the shoulder where he'd brushed against a jagged rock during their escape. Despite his disheveled appearance, his eyes remained sharp and focused. "We're safe here, for now," he said, his voice low. "But we can't stay long. They'll find us eventually." Laura nodded, sinking onto the edge of the cot. Her legs ached and her throat burned from thirst, but exhaustion weighed heavier than anything else. She grabbed a bottle of water from the table and took a long drink, savoring the cool liquid as it washed away the dryness in her mouth. For a moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes, letting the quiet hum of the desert seep into her bones. When she opened them again, Nathan was watching her, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know. I mean, I'm alive. That's something, right?" "It's more than something," Nathan said firmly. "It's everything. You made it this far, Laura. Don't forget that." She looked at him, searching his face for any trace of doubt or hesitation. There was none. Instead, she saw determination, a quiet resolve that reminded her why she'd trusted him in the first place. He'd lied to her, yes, but he'd also risked everything to help her escape. And now, standing here in this tiny hideout, she realized how much they'd been through together in such a short time. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Helping me, I mean. Why take the risk?" Nathan leaned back against the wall, folding his arms across his chest. For a moment he didn't answer, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he sighed. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "Because what they're doing, what Kevin wants, it's wrong. And because—" He paused, glancing at her briefly before looking away. "Because I believe in you, Laura. I think you're stronger than you realize." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Not sincerely, anyway. Kevin had always told her she was weak, incapable of surviving without him. But Nathan saw something different in her. Something worth fighting for. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice cracking slightly. "For believing in me. For helping me." Nathan smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this mess." They spent the next few hours going over their options. The safe house had limited supplies, enough to last a couple of days at most. If they stayed too long, they risked being discovered. Leaving meant venturing back into the open, where Kevin's men and possibly others from Project Horizon would be waiting. Either way, they needed a plan. "We need to disable the project," Nathan said finally, breaking the silence. "If we can sabotage the core system, it'll buy us time, maybe even stop them permanently." Laura frowned, shaking her head. "How? We're outnumbered, unarmed, and completely out of our depth." "I've worked on the system before," Nathan explained. "I know its weaknesses. If we can get back to the compound undetected, I can shut it down." "Undetected?" Laura repeated incredulously. "That place is crawling with guards. We'll never make it past them." "We have one advantage," Nathan countered. "They won't expect us to come back. Not so soon anyway. And if we time it right—" Laura stared at him, torn between admiration and disbelief. Part of her wanted to argue, to insist they find another way. But deep down she knew he was right. Running wouldn't solve anything. As long as Project Horizon existed, and as long as Kevin was involved, they'd never truly be free. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her stomach. "Let's do it." Their return to the compound, was a tense and nerve-wracking journey. Moving under cover of darkness, they stuck to the shadows, avoiding patrols and staying alert for any sign of danger. By the time they reached the facility, adrenaline coursed through Laura's veins, sharpening her senses and dulling her fatigue. This was it, their one chance to end this nightmare once and for all. Nathan led the way, guiding her through service tunnels he claimed were rarely used. The air grew cooler as they descended deeper into the complex, the hum of machinery growing louder with each step. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber filled with towering servers and glowing panels. At the center stood a massive device, pulsating with energy. This was the heart of Project Horizon. "This is it," Nathan whispered, motioning for Laura to stay close. "The core system. Once we disable it, the entire operation will collapse." He moved quickly, pulling tools from a small bag slung over his shoulder. Laura watched nervously as he worked, her gaze darting toward the entrance in case anyone appeared. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, with a final twist of a screwdriver, Nathan straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Done," he said, exhaling sharply. "Now let's get out of here." But before they could move, alarms blared overhead, piercing the silence. Red lights flashed, illuminating the room in harsh bursts. Footsteps echoed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. "They know we're here," Laura said, panic rising in her chest. Nathan grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a side exit. "Stick with me. We can still make it." They ran, dodging guards and weaving through corridors until they reached the outer perimeter. Just as they thought they were home free, Kevin stepped into their path, flanked by two armed men. His face twisted into a sneer as he raised his weapon, aiming it squarely at Laura. "You really thought you could win?" He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You belong to me, Laura. Always have, always will." Before Laura could react, Nathan stepped forward, shielding her once again. "Leave her alone, Kevin. Your game's over." Kevin laughed coldly, tightening his grip on the gun. Not quite. Time seemed to slow as Laura braced herself for what came next. But instead of firing, Kevin faltered, distracted by a sudden commotion behind him. One of his men stumbled backward, clutching his arm, while another guard shouted orders. In the chaos, Nathan seized the opportunity, tackling Kevin to the ground and wresting the weapon from his grasp. "Go!" he yelled to Laura, shoving her toward the gate. She hesitated, torn between fleeing and staying to help. But Nathan's voice cut through her indecision. "Trust me." With tears streaming down her face, Laura turned and ran, pushing through the gates and into the open desert. Behind her, shouts and scuffles faded into the distance, replaced by the sound of her own labored breathing. She didn't stop until she reached the safety of the rocks, collapsing onto the sand and gasping for air. Minutes later, Nathan appeared, limping but alive. His clothes were torn, and blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but he managed a weary smile when he saw her. "We did it," he said, sitting beside her. "It's over." Laura stared at him, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. Wordlessly, she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Nathan squeezed her hand gently, his smile softening. "You're welcome. But remember, you're the one who got us through this, not me." As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Laura felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time she believed she could face it. With Nathan by her side, she vowed to leave the shadows of her past behind and embrace whatever future lay ahead.